Every time we emit 1 ton of CO2, we save 10 tons of CO2 elsewhere. How many times did I hear this statement across the entire tech industry? The truth is that it is super hard to assess the net positive impact of tech on the environment. It requires in-depth discussion that we're going to have with Gauthier Roussilhe. Hello everyone, welcome to Green IO. I'm Gaël and Green, and in this podcast we empower responsible technologists to build a greener digital world, one bite at a time. Twice a month on a Tuesday, our guests from across the globe share insights, tools and alternative approaches enabling people within the tech sector and beyond to boost digital sustainability. Having a 1-hour discussion with Gauthier Roussilhe feels like entering a candy store for any responsible technologist. Shall we talk about Taiwanese water consumption and its semiconductor industry? Shall I go instead for the quest for ever pure metal in the semiconductor industry and its crazy environmental impact? Shall we talk about the entire history of our digital economy? All these topics have been covered by Gauthier Roussilhe during his PhD in Melbourne's RMIT University and are still researched by him now that he's head of research and development at Hubblo. And yet today, we will focus on IT for green, trying to get some perspective on a $700 billion industry. That is how the International Energy Agency assesses climate tech, trying to answer a very simple question. Can digital technology be net positive? Or to rephrase it, can digital technologies have a net positive ecological impact? This is not such a new topic for Gauthier. And this time he has explored it with his teammate in an in-depth study commissioned by the ADEME, the French agency for the ecological transition, called IT for Green, environmental assessment of the direct and indirect impact of digital technologies for some use cases. And here is the catch. These use cases are all super concrete and insightful, such as digitization of public lighting, the dynamic line rating of high voltage lanes, or the digitization of nitrogen fertilizer spreading, for instance. So our discussion today will not be based on conceptual model, but on real use cases to understand when IT is really for green. Welcome, Gauthier. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I think we managed after a few years chasing each other. And that's quite funny, actually, to have you on a topic that is not recent to you, but it is not the topic where you wrote most of your study and your research papers, because you've been quite a strong voice against the many environmental footprints of digital technologies. And even often, well, it was a side project, but you studied a bit low tech. Why did you decide to join this ADEME study focusing on IT for green rather than green for IT?
Yeah, actually, I've been working on that topic for a while. I think I started doing research on IT for green maybe in, I guess, during the COVID pandemic.
Okay.
And also, I remember a specific moment when I was in a meeting in a French ministry. I remember somebody from a French telecom operator and several IT companies doing PR people saying, but don't forget, whatever you want, how you want to regulate IT sector, 1 ton of CO2 emitted by our sector is 10 ton avoided in other sectors. So it's not an issue if we have a footprint, as long as we contribute positively to the transition of France. And I remember listening to that statement, to that affirmation, and saying like, okay, where does that number is coming from? And if it's true, it's actually great. Huh? I mean, nobody will mind having something that works once for a while. But I got very curious about, okay, that's a new number to me. How is it produced? And so in 2021, I spent like 2 months kind of diving into the biggest reports that were producing this kind of numbers. GSMA, for like the GSMA report, for instance, that is from basically the global telecom operator organization, or GSI and so on. And yeah, and I actually looked deep into the appendix, into their hypothesis and so on. And I realized that actually most numbers were very, very, very flawed methodologically, to put it very nicely. And we should not base any decision on this kind of numbers.
So my bad, actually, it was not such a recent topic for you. And what you've illustrated here is something that I've experienced myself a lot, which is that if I search IT for green or positive impact of IT on the web, I literally get flooded by articles, report, etc., saying how great it is for climate, energy, biodiversity, etc. So it seems that the trend is pretty straightforward. Yet you mentioned that when we start to scratch the surface, it's a bit of a different story. So why did ADEM decided to launch this study? Was it because they wanted something to challenge a bit I would say, a global narrative that tech is good for the planet? Or my question would be, where does it come from?
Yeah. So actually, the question of asking ourselves that is digitalization helping or not reaching carbon targets or whatever ecological transition targets. Like the first time we are seeing like publication going that way are quite old. So to my knowledge, the first one affirming that remote working will help reduce CO2 emission is from 1976. And it was published by the father of remote working, Jack Niels. And it was the first time, like, really, we linked technological development, in that case, telecommunication development, with a reduction in ecological impact. Obviously, it was the first report. It was then debunked within, at least challenged within academia for 20 years. But basically, the question predates from transport, and then we put it back. We kind of put it in IT. The issue with that question is that most reports you will see today are coming from the industry. So coming from industrial organization, maybe some tech companies, but actually it's very rare to see a country, a government, like a public actor actually doing the work themselves. But that's why ADEM decided to do that. It was to kind of provide the first, like a world first report where a state is actually looking himself or themselves to the impact of digital technologies on their territory. And it's actually super new. It means changing the perspective of the analysis also change a lot the results you're going to have. Because you are going from a company looking at, is my tech solution deployed in that little space is producing something positive or not, versus a state looking at whatever, like an agnostic tech solution in its territory, saying, okay, this is my carbon reduction target. This is the tech solution I put in that context. How much is it helping me reaching my target? And that's a very different question, actually. And also the methods differs a bit, and the results also change a lot.
I can imagine, and actually I would love to jump to these results. It might be a tricky question. When I'm asked all the time, what is your favorite episode, I tend to find an escape way because I don't want to choose but between my favorite children. But what is the favorite use case? I mean, I've listed some of them in the introduction. I think you've done a research on 30 for the ADEM, but you put the spotlight on 5.
At the end, we did 9 use cases.
9, okay, sorry.
Also, I worked on 3 of them, so I don't know all of them that much because we are a team of almost 10 people, so we had to split the work. But to be fair, I quite enjoyed doing the assessment for remote working in France. It's a huge topic. It's how it all started. Because, I was saying the first publication on IT for Green was actually with remote working and transport economy. And it was actually very interesting to do this kind of analysis in France with new data. And also because it's a very complex one, because it's a solution that have effect both on transport, residential buildings, and offices, tertiary buildings. So you need to look at 3 different sectors all at once. And it's a complex case, but it's super fun and relatively fun to do.
This is super interesting that you choose the first use case being the one connecting to ancient history, not ancient, but at least some way back in time, the very first use case about IT for green. Could you tell us a bit more about the scope, the methodology? You mentioned it was quite complex, and the findings. So is remote working good or not for the planet, or at least for France?
When you do this kind of assessments, you change a bit your perspective on how you are counting stuff. So, for instance, you might be familiar with lifecycle assessments, a way to look at the footprint of products and services throughout the life cycle. But you might not know that there's several kind of possibilities to do that. And maybe one example is to say, like for example, if you take the plane, your carbon footprint as a passenger would be basically the amount of fuel and the CO2 emitted by the flight divided by the number of passengers. So that's what we call an attributional lifecycle assessment, where you have an allocation key. In that case, that is the number of passengers. Then you can say, okay, maybe I don't want to take the plane for ecological reasons. Whether you take the plane or not, it will take off without you, which is also right. You can also do this kind of calculation on the marginal impact that you will have if you are in the plane or not, or the impact compared to the person that replace you on your seat. And then there is a third way to count, which is called long-term consequential, which is to ask how many people need to stop taking the plane for the plane not to be assigned to a route anymore. And then you need to do more like a calculation of critical mass. And it's 3 different ways to see the world. And when you look at the effect of digital technology in a wide context, we tend to adopt more this perspective of consequential analysis. So basically, we're asking, okay, we put this technology into a context, and what will be the effect that we can have? What are the consequences expected and unexpected? Mm-hmm. In the case of our assessment, we had to do it from 2022 to 2035. So it was a 40 years assessment. So we had to, that's why you had to map consequences and also to map out how the context is evolving along that period. So first, what you do is you select the time frame, you select a geographical scope. In that case, we wanted to make a model that could be reproducible in many French contexts. So we use a statistical format called urban area. It's basically a statistical way to account for cities and the attraction with outer cities. It's something that has been set up by statistical office in most European countries, and that's how we are looking at which cities are attracting workers. And basically, you have like a core, then you have like a crown, and you will basically create a geographical unit like that. So we set 3 kinds of units like that, like a small, middle, and a big one, excluding Paris, because Paris in France is it's an exception. And we set up looking at the impact of remote working in 3 of these different urban areas.
And so that's how you define the scope. And what was the methodology to try to assess whether it has a positive or not so net positive impact, remote working?
Yeah. So now we have the time frame, we have geographical location, and then the big part is to define a reference scenario. So it means asking yourself, if the solution was not deployed, what would you do otherwise? Which is quite tricky when you think of remote working, because the reference scenario is remote working already. So what we looked at actually with that scenario is what are the environmental impact of a massification of remote working or a diminution of remote working from 2022 to 2035. Because we cannot make a counterfactual scenario saying, okay, there is no remote working in France, because it cannot hold, because remote working is already there and is already producing effects. So basically we design a let's say like a third scenario, which is basically business as usual remote working, where we assume that remote working stays in France for the next 14 years as it is today. And then you need to look at what is actually remote working. And you realize that actually when you look at national statistics, remote working is really not evenly shared between workers, not at all. And it's mostly like people working in services, but there is specific kind of services like IT, consulting, financial services, where you can see like maybe like 30% of your workers doing remote working more than 3 days a week, which is insane when you look when you compare it to other workers in other categories. So we also kind of make scenarios in the future saying, okay, so if we do a massification of remote working in France, it means that we also increase the number of teleworking days for categories that are not teleworking a lot today. We also increase the intensity. So people that we increase the number of people doing remote working like more than 3 days a week and so on. And we base that on projection that we have already from remote working in France. And it's more kind of the employee scenario because we followed growth patterns according to public survey of people asking if they want to telework more or not. So we are not following like a trend that is, okay, what do the employees want? And let's see how the growth is if employees remote working as much as they would like. The other scenarios, like the teleworking reduction, is more the employer scenario. And then we work with sociologists from Sciences Po that are specialized on the topic to say, okay, what are the trends for large employers in France? Like, middle-sized companies, but also large companies because are a big pool of remote working. And we looked on a projection until 2035, reducing basically drastically, putting aside like people that can remote work like more than 3 days a week, except for specific IT services and so on.
You mean 3 days a month or 3 days a week?
3 days a week, sorry. Yeah. Because 3 days a week is actually something you see only in very specific categories.
Okay.
And employers tends to want to reduce that a lot from the interview and the resources that we have.
It's usually more one day a week as a perk, and even sometimes just two days per month. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, normally, yes, we are mostly on average of 1 to 2 days. But 3 days is only for specific kind of jobs. And then you need to map out effects from remote working. So what we do is we are designing a consequence tree where you basically link together consequences and unattended of remote working. So direct effects, or you have a new solution of remote work, like a IT solution. But the issue is, even if you don't have people doing teleworking in your companies, anyway, everybody's using a solution for online collaboration, even if you're in the same office.
So just to bring concrete examples here, you mentioned, for instance, Teams or Slack being deployed for the sake of remote working, but eventually people are calling each other even if they are 2 desks away.
Yeah, but even if there is only one person doing remote working in your company, if you want everybody to collaborate together on the same project, you need to have IT solutions that allows remote working anyway. So, and even when there is no more remote workers, you still have software that allow collaboration anyway. So whether you have remote workers or not, anyway, it will not change the demand on these solutions.
A quick word about the sponsor of this episode, Roussilhe. Roussilhe provides leading data, tools, and professional services to assess and reduce the environmental footprint of tech. As a Green IO listener, Roussilhe grants you a 1 month free trial access to their Roussilhe database, a search engine for the footprint of any IT equipment or services. Find the carbon or water footprint for tens of thousands of products in a click, and so much more. The link for this special offer is in the show notes. Full disclosure, I only accept partnership with companies whose services or initiatives I personally support or use myself. As usual, however, I'll let you be your own judge about these products. It is something that so let's focus specifically on France. I'm puzzled a bit by what you said, because if I understand you well, some IT solution were deployed solely for the sake of remote working. I thought it was more collaboration works suite were deployed way before the boom of remote working before COVID-19. But maybe I'm wrong.
No, it's not what I'm saying. Is at first we had like solutions specifically for video conferencing, audio conferencing, and so on. That was something that we use more in the remote situations. But anyway, especially after 2018 and 2019, you got the whole package. So you got Teams, you got SharePoint, and anyway, whether you were remote working or not, you were on the online collaboration solution. And whether you are increasing teleworking or not, it will not change how much software you will deploy, because anyway, the software we already have allows for collaboration.
So the environmental footprint of these software now are sort of neutralized in your three different scenarios, because basically they are there and they're not expected to move away or to be dismantled.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, because if it's in a reference scenario and if it's also in a scenario that we are like with massification diminution, then it's zero because it compensates itself. So we didn't look much at the IT part of remote working, because anyway, it's there in all our scenarios.
Interesting. It's a bit like, hey, internet is here, so let's use it, because in any case, it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, I understand. So what did you look for?
So then we can look into, that was for the direct effect. Also, we look at network use and so on. But if we look in indirect effects, the first part is substitution of car travel, because you assume that if you not go to office, then you don't take your car, then you can avoid CO2 emission that are emitted by your turbo engine in your car. So that's the biggest effect of remote working. I mean, that's the one you expect the most, and that's also the one you see in real life. Yet you can say, okay, there's a substitution of several kilometers that you should have done today, yet all the trips that you need to make are not completely substituted, because maybe you need to take your kids to school, maybe you need to go to the supermarket and so on. So you cannot substitute every kilometer you will do today. And you can see that before, your travel pattern was like, I leave home, maybe I will drop my kids to school, go to the office. On the way back, I go to the supermarket and I'm going back. So it was more like a chain. And when you are doing remote working, it's more like a star-shaped displacement, because you are from your home and you will just go, okay, I go to the pharmacy. Okay, now I go pick up my kids at school. Now I will do something else. So it's a different ways of working, but overall, you reduce kilometers that you travel per day, but not all of them. So we need to count for that too.
Would it also be the case, and could you even quantify the fact that maybe the supermarket or the school actually do not require to drive by car, because, hey, they're closer, you see, but you drive your kid to school because it's on the way to the office. So were you able to estimate this, which must be crazy complicated to do?
No, actually, we use national statistics for that, and we knew that when you are remote working and you are in a star-shaped trip pattern, you tend to use less carbon intensive mode of transportation. Bikes can be used, but also if you're in urban area and if you have access to bike infrastructure. So we didn't apply the same mix of transport for people taking their car to the office to people still from their home doing like the little trips for supermarket and so on. We assume less carbon emissive transports. Then we also is quite well known also that the remote workers tend to do less trips, but also can have the same amount of kilometers travel yearly than non-remote workers, because you tend to compensate the trips you are not doing during your week by more maybe longer weekends, or going further away for weekends or for leisure trips. It's something that was actually looked at by Stephen Sorrell and Caldarola on the national transport survey of England, where basically you have a time series going from 2000 until today, with a group of remote workers and non-remote workers, and you can actually compare travel patterns and distance travel and so on. And so we accounted also like for extra kilometers for other trips. Then you can also look for, okay, I'm at home, so maybe I need to heat more my home because now I'm there and I'm doing an office job. I'm off my desk, so I can get cold because my physical activity is quite low. So then, okay, let's say you heat more your home. What is the impact of using more heating? And there's a lot of questions around that because first is when you are leaving your home to go to the office, are you actually lowering your heating system? That's a big question. We assume that like the clean side temperature of a home when it's occupied is 19 degrees, and when you are at the office, it's 16 degrees. So assuming that you are lowering your heating system when you're not there.
But this assumption, how do you justify them? Was it based on a review of literature? Was it more like guess stuff?
No, this one is a hypothesis, but it's based on on how the energy efficiency of home is calculated in France, called the DPE. It's based on that kind of values for heating, whether it's occupied or not occupied. So we use that, but also it's a very, very tricky effect because it means that if you don't have this kind of energy saving habit of lowering your heating when you're not there, then we are not assigning extra impact to remote working when you are there, because anyway you will not have decreased your heating. So in that case, remote working has no impact on heating, because anyway you will not lower your heating. But if you actually have an energy saving habit of lowering your heating, and then when you are remote working you are re-increasing your heating, then it's adding impact to remote working. That's super weird.
And how do you put these hypotheses in the model? By that I mean, did you decide that, I don't know, 1/3 of the population were actually doing things to increase energy efficiency and reduce their heating when they're going to the office, and 2/3 are not paying that much attention? How do you find the proper figures, or at least the proper estimate within this estimate?
Yeah. So on that, we also use a lot of scientific literature, and you should not think that 6 hours of extra occupation at your home means 6 extra hours of heating. On average, the ratio will say like for 6 extra hours of occupation, we account for 2 more hours of heating. Because also you stay there the day, so the need for heating is not the same as it is at night. And so there is this kind of complexity, but that are justified in the literature. And then we still had to make the hypothesis that everybody is doing energy saving gesture, because it's as it should be normally in a perfect world. Because the question is not to be realistic, but to assess what will be the impact if everything was going in the right direction.
Okay. So it's like some sort of marginal impact that we cannot claim these savings, because there are energy savings that should be done in any case, and you cannot sort of steal the positiveness from another initiative or another things that needs to be done.
It's a tricky part, but also we account like for extra use of electricity for appliances. But it was, and also we also included extra use of AC. But also because building energy, also there is a lot of seasonal factors, obviously, that we also averaged out in the model. But obviously, teleworking in summer has less impact energy-wise for your home than teleworking in winter.
Okay.
But it's averaged out in the model.
So you run through this entire decision tree, and we see that it's pretty complex. Are there other big buckets that you needed to explore, or can we have the findings? No, not yet.
There's one last part that is also quite weird. Is do remote workers means that the I mean, because we have less remote workers, there's less occupation of offices. And because offices are less busy, are you actually reducing the dynamically heating and cooling of your building? And we assume that if there is more teleworkers, then the energy consumption of heating and cooling in ventilation in office buildings will be reduced, which is actually not the case. Because if you think of an open space, whether you have 1 employee or 10, well, it's the same area that need to be heated or cooled, whether it's largely occupied or not. So we saw almost no effect in office building linked to occupation, except for new buildings with kind of area that have been designed to kind of have different areas to separate heating and cooling, and then occupation can have an effect, but it's not largely deployed in France. And the other part is the less human you have in your space, and the more heating you need to make, because humans are still emitting heat.
You lose your 37 degree heaters.
Yeah. So actually, we looked at that and said, okay, so there's basically at the moment not that thing to look at because of open spaces and how how offices were designed recently. And so we looked mostly at how does it affect on the long term the demand for more offices in France, which is more like a long-term effect. But also it's a tricky part because office demand in France is in full degrowth. Basically, it will be divided by 3 by 2050. So we mapped out how remote working, whether you are massifying it or reducing it, is changing the degrowth rate of the office construction sector. And that was the other big chunk. But remote working, you need to look at always this 3 parts: transport, residential buildings, and office buildings. And there's a lot of other effects I'm skipping, but that's the main purpose. We run the model. And there's one thing that we do because of the fact that it's a state demand, is we compare avoided impact with the targets that need to be achieved per cities. On most scenarios for massification of remote working, in all cities, all urban areas we looked at, it was net positive on CO2. So it was avoiding emissions. But it was marginal.
Okay, so good, but maybe not where the most impact lies.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I think we end up with something like 1,000 tons avoided per year per city, which
that's not a lot.
Yeah,
that would be roughly like 100 households. You were mentioning Montpellier. Montpellier is quite a big city in France. I think it's top 5 or top 10. Yeah.
And the thing is, that's if I'm averaging out the annual impact. But also the issue is that both negative and positive impact are decreasing over time. There is diminishing returns because in our model, we also assume that we keep electrifying cars. So the avoided emission from a thermal engine in 2022 will be decreased because there will be less thermal cars in 2035. So it's basically like we can see in our annual perspective that basically all the effects are going to zero. I mean, it's still far away, but it's actually diminishing. And the same for heating in households, because we also included that we're gonna deploy more heat pumps in our households, so more efficient heating, so also less emission linked to heating in household over time. So that's why like both negative and positive effects are actually decreasing over time, is because if we succeed in doing energy transition and ecological transition, anyway, and it's not only remote working, it's all digital solution, the net impact must decrease over time. And it's normal. And it's a good news. It means you are actually doing a transition. That's counterintuitive, but when you do this kind of assessment, if you have diminishing returns, it's normal. So the thing is, we have net positive impact. That's great. but it's marginal when you put it back in the size of the city. I think for the biggest city, it was over a period of 14 years, it avoided 40,000 tons of CO2 emissions. So this one, if you average it out, it's a bit more importance per year. But compared to a large city like Montpellier, it's really like the thickness of the straw. It's really something very small. And we compare it back to the target, to carbon reduction targets of car travels inside the city. It was basically contributing to 2% of the effort, of the annual effort.
So you mean reducing the objective of reducing car travel was achieved only thanks to 2% by this increase in remote working? Okay.
Yeah, normally in France and in cities, every year you need to decrease emission linked to car travel by that much. And that annual effort, remote working could only contribute to 2%.
Well, there are really a lot to unpack here, but maybe and just to sort of wrap it up, the fact that you need to consider the right scenario and having also being cautious of not stealing positive effect from other policies, and the fact that actually marginal return should reduce, because if things go in the right direction, we will have less and less to decarbonize. So quite obviously, any solutions aiming to decarbonize will bear less and less results. Just maybe one last question, and then you can put it in perspective with the two other studies where you work, not going into full detail mode as you did, and thanks a lot for this, for us to understand. But one last question, you focused exclusively on the environmental indicator of carbon emission, or you also used other one? And do we have other results for, I don't know, biodiversity loss, water consumption or whatever?
So we did a study based on European standards. So it means we looked at 16 indicators, including GWP. But for the sake of simplicity, I just talk about GHG emissions. But we looked at 16 indicators, but does not include biodiversity. So yeah, and also because public policies are mostly focusing on carbon, that's why.
And the results are sort of the same, or it's very different if you look at different indicators, like if you take water or...
It's broadly the same dynamics, except for one indicator, which is depletion of minerals and metals, because it's most of the time always negative, because you cannot replenish metals and minerals.
Yeah, sure. We cannot plant gold. Yeah.
And also because IT is always something that has an impact on that. But I forgot to mention that I was speaking about the massification of remote working scenario. But diminution of remote working actually is adding emission nowadays. So it also means that if we reduce the amount of remote working that we see right now in France, it will add emissions. It will not. So that's also the tricky thing. We're in the dynamic where we are already doing teleworking. If we increase it, we can reduce a bit more emissions, but marginally. But if we diminishing it, we're gonna start adding more emission than before.
Which sort of shows that in the actual situation, in 10 or 15 years when electrification will have happened, etc., it's better to have remote working than not having it, because it has some impact. But of course, this impact will reduce over time.
Yeah, you cannot look at remote working only through the environmental lens. Social health, social business, blah, blah. So yeah, we just gave the perspective from the environmental standpoint. And it's actually, what is surprising is because since France has a low carbon electricity and so on, normally when we do things that are changing the power consumption, it doesn't show as much. But here we are actually avoiding fuel consumption. So we assume that will be much more impact actually, because we're actually reducing fuel consumption. And even in that context, the impact is much lower than we expected.
Okay. So the bottom line will be, even for something which seems as straightforward as reducing fuel consumption in a country where the carbon intensity of the electricity is pretty low, so the substitution should be massive. It's not such a straightforward effect. I mean, it brings some results, but maybe not that big, and it will be an issue to pause this effort, but maybe for a policymaker, it shouldn't be like one of the 3 silver bullets that they want to shoot at climate change. Okay, got it. What about the 2 other studies? And what sort of results did you find?
Okay. Each study is a bit of a rabbit hole, but the second one is kind of the golden case. It's something on transmission lines in France, where it's only run by only one state company called RTE. So it's a perfect case because we have a monopoly. It's a case where we can deploy it at French scale all at once because we are looking at all of the French network all at once. And only one actor that can decide what he wants to do or not. So that's golden case to look for positive impact normally. And we looked at a solution called DLR, which is dynamic line rating. It means that basically instead of having a static value of the capacity of electricity you can travel through transmission lines, which is a static value that you renew every season normally in France. Here you have, thanks to connected weather station and so on each line, which is on average 20 kilometers, you can increase dynamically the amount of powers that can be transmitted through these lines. So it means you can stop losing energy. You can increase the amount of electricity you can add on the grid. And we looked at it specific for wind turbines, because wind turbines, sometimes you cut the production because one of the reasons is that the transmission lines don't have enough capacity to get the power to the grid because of the static value that we have on these lines. With dynamic values, with all the connected solution we looked at, you can add per year per line 300 megawatt per hour. So it's good, and it's adding power produced by wind turbines. So it's the low carbon electricity that you inject to your grid. So that's very good. And same, we did a projection from 2022 to 2035, working closely with the teams of the transmission company after, with the actual values, with the actual data, and also their own hypothesis, because they know they work much better than we do. And so we assume that today, like in 2022, there was like 3 lines, I think, if I remember well, with that solution. And they assume that by 2035, there'll be 50 lines equipped with that solution. And so we looked at the effect. Okay, you inject more low carbon electricity to the grid, that's great. But actually, 30% of that new electricity stays in France, and 70% is actually exported to the European grid, mostly to Belgium, Netherlands, Germany. So you need to also look for import-export. Also, because of that, you are also reducing the number of engineering works you have to do to upgrade your transmission lines. So you're also avoiding impact linked to civil works. So we kind of looked at all of that. We also even looked as a test, for rebound effect. That is well known that there is a lot of publication of that in Germany, that people that are picking up a green electricity provider tends to consume more electricity than before.
Okay, so some sort of a free pass, like I've done my job and now I can enjoy good energy, as much as energy as I want. Okay.
Yeah, but all things equal, and especially with the same price for electricity, which is something that we need to be careful with. So solution, net positive impact on mostly everything, except the same indicator as usual for mineral and metals. But amazing, and we avoided 33,000 tons of GHG emission in the period that we studied. So perfect. But the issue is, first, France is not a big country for wind farms.
Okay.
So the amount of lines where you can apply that solution is actually limited. 50 lines at the end of the period studied is not a lot.
How many lines do we have in France?
It's not a question of lines, it's a question of lines that are injecting power coming from wind turbines. So it's not all lines, it's candidate lines, we call them. So when we looked at the avoided carbon on the period compared to the yearly effort just to decarbonize electricity production in France, it contributed to 0.018%.
Okay, 0.018%. And was it still net positive? Because I guess you talked a lot about the handprints, but what is the footprint of such a solution? Does it require a lot of IT equipment or?
It's a net impact, so it's also including the footprint. When I'm saying net impact, it means we are looking at both direct and indirect effect, whether they're positive or negative. But we account for weather stations, we account for network use and so on. But it's in most of the studies, the part of IT is so small compared to the effect that the solution have on the sector, on the economy and so on. So even with weather stations that are weighing like 60 kilos, it's still nothing compared to the effect you have.
If you're enjoying this episode, help us get more responsible technologists on board. Please rate the podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Deezer, and drop us a comment on YouTube. And now, back to our episode. I'd like to pause here and just to unpack a bit what you've said, because you sound a bit not skeptical, but disappointed by the findings. But from a technologist perspective, I heard quite a lot of good things, which is that the net positive effect is good without any question. I mean, the footprint is way below the handprint, so the amount of avoided emissions saved. And overall, it helps reducing the carbon emissions coming from the energy grid or the electricity grid in France. But where you seem a bit disappointed is that actually, yes, it's good, but overall, it's not that big, and then we might focus on a different solution which could leverage more results. Is it what you feel?
We need to compare like the net effect, the net impact that we are calculating compared to the annual effort that need to be produced in that subsector. And when you are doing industrial study, they never do that. They never compare to the effort that should be made. So when you actually do that comparison, it's really underwhelming. And it's really like a golden case. It's a perfect solution because it doesn't depend of human behavior, which can remove a lot of effect. It's industrial process on a very controlled environment. Only one actor that is in full control of the supply chain of the solution with a very stable funding scheme. So, I mean, being funded by the state mostly. So this kind of context means that the solution there are in the perfect setup to maximize positive impact. And it does. We have a lot of net positive impact overall. It's so little compared to what we need to achieve on that subsector.
That's a good old question of order of magnitude and where you put your effort. But indulge me to play the devil advocate here. You know, when we do workshops such as Climate Fresk or the Digital Collage, it's quite often that this question comes from participants that 1%, 4%, the usual number which is thrown at participant, that it should be around 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, what is accounted from the digital sector. And people are reacting 4% is nothing. But usually the answer is actually the steel industry or the cement industry, which are the most massively carbon emitting ones. They account for something like 7 or 8%. So 4% is already a pretty big number. So is it the case also here that we tend to look for a solution which says, we're going to save 10%, but actually these solutions don't really exist, and it's a matter of 0.018% here, 0.01% there, and with thousands of different little efforts actually enabling us to achieve a massive reduction? Or do these solutions with massive effect actually exist?
Well, you talk about like global footprints and like 4% worldwide and so on. Here, what I'm saying is only contributing to 0.018% of the effort. I think the effort of a subsector within France. So I'm only talking about the effort of the carbon reduction of only the power production subsector.
It's a tiny one from a subsector. I got it, but does it mean that actually when we are investing in technology to solve this sort of problem, we should maybe put the energy and the money elsewhere because the impact will be higher?
First point is also digital solutions can counteract each other. For example, I talked about teleworking, but the other study I've done is about ride sharing. And ride sharing is meant to increase the occupation rate of private cars that mostly for short distance will go from home to office and back and forth. So if actually you do that, then you reduce the amount of carbon emissions that can be avoided when you are doing remote working. You see? So you should not assume that aggregation of digital solution is a plus, because it's not. It's a complex system when you're interacting with complex sectors and infrastructures. That doesn't mean that it will add up. That's the issue first. Then there is a big elephant in the room, and I'm studying that at the moment. It's added emission due to the digitalization of the oil and gas sector. Because digitalization is not only applied to the nice and friendly sectors, it's applied to all sectors of economy, including oil and gas that are actually massive purchaser of IT solutions.
We had on the show Will and Holly Alpine, who sort of made a world-class case of why they left Microsoft when they realized that just one single project in a Permian Gulf, I think, was offsetting in the wrong way all the efforts they've done by creating a Champions League of sustainability advocates within Microsoft, and that the intensity, the carbon intensity of the production was increasing so high that it would completely counterbalance all the positive effects they had. I see your point. It is called enabled emission.
They call it enabled. I call it added.
Okay.
I mean, whatever. I think we mean the same thing. But the issue in the point you're raising is you want to compare from one side footprint of ICT and handprint, only assuming net positive impact. But actually, before comparing footprint to handprint, we need already to make the sum of avoided and added emission in a handprint, and then you can compare to footprints. The issue here is we're missing one factor, which are the the added emissions. And what I've been looking at through microeconomic analysis for now is I can see that there's much more money going from ICT to oil and gas than is going to renewable and nuclear energy. At least four times more going to the oil and gas and to renewable and nuclear energy. So we might be on a case where digitalization of oil and gas can be actually adding a lot without being able for us to assess it for now. But it might be big, or at least bigger than we imagine.
I think the word bigger is interesting here because it's big and it's sometimes a bit too big for us. I mean, we can take the perspective, and thanks a lot for bringing it, of the entire IT industry. And this is where I work and where a lot of my colleagues and peers work, obviously. And in that case, overall, sometimes we could have the feeling that we should just hit the stop or pause button just to reallocate the effort in a more clever way. Because for everything we try to do the right way, there are always people using our technologies, our code, or designs to actually do the wrong thing. But if we go a level down, I would say, and I would I'm going to take a very concrete example, which is the discussion I had with Laetitia Bourne when she joined me, I think it was a year ago, to discuss the Vinted use case. She studied how Vinted, and I think you were part of the study, or actually you
I was around.
You were around. Yeah, absolutely. So you were around this study. And something really struck me is that when she reworked how, and David Exazer as well, her co-author, when they reworked how they should assess avoided emission, she focused a lot on direct and indirect rebound effect, which was sort of overlooked in the initial Vinted report. And one example she gave me really stuck into my mind, and this is the fact that Vinted enables second-hand market, obviously, and without Vinted, there will be less second-hand clothes being sold and exchanged than thanks to them. But they also enable savings, so people, they earn money, and this money is quite often, I think the proportion was something like 30 or 40%, used to actually buy more clothes, and quite a lot often from ultra-fast fashion providers such as Shein. So basically, Vinted does the right thing, give money back to its users, but this money is used the wrong way. And I was like, oh my God, this is really bad. And on the other end, and maybe that will be my final question for you, as a technologist, where do you draw the line of your responsibility? And I'm not talking about the entire digital sector, but more like me. I work at Vinted. I work in a climate tech company. And am I that responsible of what people they do with their money? Am I that responsible of indirect rebound effect, which seems mostly linked to the way the superstructure of the economy, the politics, and so on works, which is today a very extractivist capitalism. Shall I go or shall I stay? That could be the question.
I think there are also a lot of misunderstandings about what we call rebound effects. First of all, the rebound effect is not automatic. It's not every solution we provide would make rebound effect, because rebound effect is growth most of the time, and growth doesn't happen everywhere. Like for instance, a city might have a decreasing budget, so rebound effect that will be linked to reinvestment due to savings might not happen at all, because anyway, since they lost money on other budgets, they will just put that money saved in budget in order to keep them alive. So there is no such things as indirect rebound effect in that case. And from a household perspective, we have a classic rebound effect in literature that is, my heating system is more efficient, then I'm saving more money, then I reinvest this money into increasing the temperature of my home. This effect doesn't happen when the price of electricity is going up. So you cannot assume that there is reinvestment or direct rebound effect all the time, because for that to happen, first you need to be in a growth perspective or a growth enabling situation, which is not the case of most. Most people. Most people don't see the budget increase that much. It's quite the contrary. That's why it's important to see what we actually call rebound effect. Then, from a technologist perspective, if you take the Vinted case, for me, and I think that was a conclusion from Laetitia and David, if you want to stop people to reinvest the savings by buying ultra-fast fashion, one of the solutions they proposed is for the users, that the savings are not paid back in euros, but in like the digital currency of Vinted. So it can only be used to buy other things on Vinted. So it stays in a closed loop. Yeah, you close the loop. By doing that, you can actually remove most of the bad effects that they were mapping out. Yet it means that the economic model will be much less attractive to users. So for me, I would not that much put the responsibility on users, and more on how the company decided to run the economic model, but also understanding like how they are pressured to do so. It's hard to have a sustainable business model.
Yeah. That goes all the way back to the question of who am I working for and how sustainable the business is.
And also you can work on solutions that don't have net positive impact, but yet are helping. I mean, not every companies or every solution has to have net positive impact. If you do like climate research or climate mapping or satellite solution, it will help. Yet, I'm pretty sure that it will add emissions a little bit. But anyway, it's helping research is helping other sectors. So you should not also expect everything to go the right direction. But there is some industries that anyway they have to decline. Oil and gas, for instance. Obviously, it's quite interesting case. Like, let's say I'm a technologist that are making oil extraction more efficient, or I'm reducing leaks on a pipeline of a natural gas pipeline. You say, okay, so by being more efficient, I'm making we're extracting more oil at a cheaper price, or at least with a lower footprint. Yes, but you also help somehow in a tiny way helping the industry survive. And the industries that needs to become less and less efficient, so the price will increase. And there's also many other reasons for the price to increase for oil and gas. And so we let them die slowly. So it's also, where do I want to make things more efficient? Or what do I want to contribute with my knowledge and to the efficiency gains that I can provide? And how do I control for rebound effect? And the rebound effect, you can mostly see, you don't have to do like assessment like we do. You can fairly map out from a qualitative perspective what will be the rebound effect based on your company's business model.
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. But that it's all the question of, shall I stay in my current job or try to move to a greener one or a more impactful one with a positive impact for sure. But that's really interesting what you've mentioned, that, yeah, rebound effect happens when there is growth. And let's say, even we can take the example of the oil and gas industry. Like, let's imagine that tomorrow the European Union decide to nationalize Shell, Total, and Eni, because they want actually this company to start reducing their consumption. In that case, if you're a technologist working in these companies which have decreasing cap every year to, offset, to counter a potential rebound effect, then as a technologist, you do a pretty good job if you reduce the methane leak, for instance, because you're part of a system that is going in the right direction. But of course, it would require to be state regulated and not market regulated, because it doesn't make any sense otherwise. Okay, I got it. Super interesting. I really wanted your insights on this dilemma that many people are facing, because especially in big providers, big tech providers, you can work for a super cool client one day and the next day you work for a not so cool client.
And also, I was thinking that you can also work to make rebound effect happen, because in some cases, rebound effect can be very positive for climate, because growth in the decarbonizing sector is necessary. There is a paper from a research paper in Oslo, I think, for e-bike study in Oslo, saying that, okay, when people are buying or renting electric bike, what is actually happening? So first, there is like, what is a electric bike substituting? Is it a normal bike or is it a car? And they show that in most cases, people use electric bike to substitute kilometers that would be done by car. So that's a good effect first. Then there is the rebound effect from electric bikes. They show that people tend to do 3 times the distance they would do by bike when they are with electric bike. So it means it's a rebound effect of 300%, which is huge. And
it is pretty massive.
But it's a rebound effect that actually reduces emissions, because it's substituting to car. And if you work in decarbonizing tech with relative low footprints, rebound effect, like basically making growth happen in that kind of sector, is actually working. It's helping.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So I think it's a case-by-case study. And this is something that you mentioned when we were talking before the recording, that all the studies that you run, all those use cases, they're really focusing on France. And that's very important to remember, that it's all about the scope and the context, and that something happening in a country like France might not be as bad or opposite as efficient as it is in China, for instance, because we were talking about China. And so that also means that for a technologist, whatever your job is, the context, the scope, where you are, the business model is absolutely pivotal before making the decision, am I doing something good or something bad? If I can paraphrase you like this.
Yeah, what we did so far was very contextual to France. And you have to understand that net environmental impact are mostly not linked to the digital solution itself, but more to the context, because the solution itself has no impact. Remote working in itself has no impact. It's remote working in a rural area or in a massive city that is producing impact. So it's never the solution itself, it's a context plus solution that producing impact. And we tend to forget context a lot. And that's something that was weird for me, like when I talk with people working in tech, like they want to scale up their solutions. But if you want to scale up effects, then it's not about scaling up solution. It's about, can I reproduce the condition of my original context to other context? It's a different question for me, especially from the net impact perspective. And in the case of the study we did, yeah, it's very contextual to France, to French infrastructure, to French regulation, and it can apply, I think, to a lot of Western Europe countries, depending of some of the parameters, but in a different policy context with heavy regulation and planification that is meant to counteract non-rebound effects. What we see in France can be very different in other countries. Like, for example, China. I'm not sure how remote working will the net impact of remote working in large Chinese cities. I'm pretty sure it will be different from the result that we got in France. So that's why context is key, not a solution.
Context is key, not a solution. That could be the closing word. Maybe one final question that I tend to ask to all my guests, and that's quite funny because we were trying to find and discussing positive use case, but do you have a one final positive piece of news that you'd like to share about sustainability recently, or even IT sustainability?
The big thing about that struck me recently is the massive carbon emission reduction seen in China and India. Like the basic, like China in one semester basically reduced their carbon footprint by I think 300 megatons. So I mean, nowadays I tend to look east to look at positive news regarding climate, even if it's very paradoxical because China and India are the biggest emitter right now. I mean, some of the biggest emitter, yet they're also the one that are decarbonizing the fastest.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. There are a lot of very positive news around the world. Pakistan, which hit the fast forward button on solar panel adoption because the grid was so bad that actually the rebound effect was that, okay, my electricity grid is so bad that now I'm going to secure my provisioning by myself. And the best way and the cheapest way now is to go for Chinese electric solar panels. That's a fact. And boom, suddenly you've got a country electrifying, decreasing carbon emissions thanks to a massive reduction in the carbon intensity of its electricity grid. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see beyond our borders. Well, Gauthier, thanks a lot. That was a pretty technical episode, actually, trying to understand how you run these studies and a bit counterintuitive. Thanks a lot for sharing also your, I would say, philosophical recipe on how to be a good technologist. And Always a pleasure to have you. I hope that we will also see you on stage at some Green IO events soon, because there are, as I said in the introduction, so many other topics that you could talk about. But yeah, it was really cool. Thanks a lot for sharing all these insights.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to this Green IO episode. Because accessible and transparent information is in the DNA of Green IO, all the references mentioned in this episode are in the show notes. More information as well as the full transcript can also be found on our website greenio.tech. A huge thanks to everyone who made this episode possible, starting with our partner Gungosh Media and our executive producer Russell Becker, and of course you, my dear fellow responsible technologists. Let's keep on building a greener digital world.
One bite at a time.